The Treasurer unveiling the terms of a sweeping review into the Reserve Bank. Let's get analysis now with Stephen Hamilton, Professor at George Washington University and one of almost a dozen economists who wrote to the Treasurer outlining what they wanted from the review. Stephen Hamilton, thank you for your time. Let's start with the panel that will lead the review into the RBA. Has he got the mix right, Jim Chalmers?
Yeah, g'day, Kieran. So, look, based on our letter to the Treasurer a month or so ago, as you point out, none of us, I think, can complain in terms of what he's decided on. So the key things we focused on were independence, and sort of broad-ranging nature, and then a panel made up of monetary policy experts, of which, at least one member should be a foreign expert who's kind of outside the RBA bubble, and the Treasurer certainly delivered that. The one thing I would say about the panel, though, is, I was a little surprised that the Treasurer didn't select kind of an international expert of monetary economics. I mean, I could have picked, one of 20 names he might have chosen. He instead chose someone who has some practical experience in monetary policy at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. So, that's maybe a slight sort of disappointment, but overall, can't complain.
And two women on the panel as well. For this sort of review, that's not the norm, is it? And on the scope of the review, the breadth of the terms of reference, the approach that's very much in line with what you and your colleagues had recommended.
Yeah, a great degree of kind of diversity in the panel, and it's not easy to fill a room with female economists. We work really hard to try and improve the numbers of women in our profession. We've got a long way to go, but certainly great to see a majority of the panel members being women. And in terms of the breadth of the terms of reference, I think, that was the thing I was really concerned about. The governor of the Reserve Bank has been somewhat resistant to the review. He gave a speech last year advocating for kind of an internal review, something that wasn't independent of the RBA and Treasury. And I worried that he might push back against kind of having something that's broad-ranging, something that's independent. In the end, that's exactly what we've got. So, they have 6 to 9 months to consider everything really that the RBA does, its remit, its strategy, its culture, its communication, really every kind of corner of the RBA. And then the government has some time, once that's delivered, to consider how they might implement some of those recommendations.
And Professor Hamilton, it's been a long time between drinks, hasn't it, since there's been a review into the central bank and certainly into its key or core mandate, and that of targeting the inflation level.
Yeah, look, the Reserve Bank, a lot of viewers may not really understand this, but the Reserve Bank is probably our most critical economic institution, right? They're good functioning. Having a good functioning Reserve Bank is critical to Australians' prosperity, right? It's critical to jobs. It's critical to the standard of living. So it's really important that we get it right. And I think it's telling that in its modern history, since being an independent institution, the RBA has never been reviewed, right? It's never called, in fact, to have itself reviewed. And so I think having this review is long overdue, and it'll be a really good opportunity to make sure that institution is set up to continue to function well into the future.
Now, let's look at the performance of the RBA in relation to this current inflationary environment that we find ourselves in, and on interest rates. They've been behind the game, but they haven't been alone in being behind the game in terms of central banks around the world.
Yeah, I think, look, they certainly waited longer than other central banks to start tightening. So there's no doubt about that. The New Zealand Central Bank was kind of ahead of most countries. They saw the inflationary pressures coming and they started to tighten back last year, right? So a really long time ago. And so that meant they could start raising by less and kind of gradually gradually kind of normalize rates. Now, the US central bank similarly started a lot earlier than us and have been moving a lot faster. Having said that, inflationary pressures emerged earlier in some of those countries, in the US and the UK, for example. So I think the RBA was caught by surprise by that really strong March quarter inflation number. And that led to it increasing rates during the election. And since then, they've been trying to play catch up with these supersized 50 basis point rates. But now when I look at the interest rate of 1.25%, that's still well below even what the RBA suggests as a neutral rate. And I don't really understand why we continue to dilly-dally. We need rates at 2.5% at least as quickly as possible. So I say, let's move there fast. Last month, I would have preferred a 75 basis point increase. And I think this month, depending on what happens with inflation next week, we've got at least as much of a case to get moving at that kind of pace.
75 basis points, that's your expectation for the next meeting. As for the performance of the governor himself, the Treasurer has been keen to say he doesn't want this to be seen as taking pot shots or a witch hunt. What's your read on that?
I won't give any detailed personal views on this, Kieran, other than to say, when we wrote our letter a month ago, we were very clear to say this shouldn't be a performance evaluation, right? It certainly shouldn't be seen as a performance evaluation of any particular individual, okay? I mean, what matters is the institutions. We need to make sure that no matter who's in the chair at any particular time, that the RBA is set up to function well for the Australian people, right? Which means, do they have the right objective? Do they have the right tools to achieve that objective? Do they have the right standard practices around communication, right? Are they fronting up to the Parliament? Are they giving press conferences regularly? Are they communicating to the public what their strategy is and giving the public the necessary information to plan for the future, right? None of these are really about who the central bank governor is personally, right? So I think the review should be entirely focused on those institutions, so we get away from some kind of personal game. And I think the Treasurer is definitely right to focus on that. Look, the Reserve Bank Governor, Phil Lowe, has his term, expires at the end of next year. After the review comes back, so the government will have many months to consider their response before thinking about what they do with the governorship.
And just finally, your piece in the Sydney Morning Herald today, you wrote that there should be a single shop somewhere in the government solely devoted to using government data to evaluate the effect of policy. Can you explain your thinking behind that and the vacuum that's currently there in terms of analysing government and public policy?
Yeah, this is a position I've had, Kieran, for at least a decade. I worked at Treasury back in sort of 2010 to 2012 period. And I remember going down to the tax unit of Treasury and saying, so you have all of the tax returns of all of the Australian people for decades. Does anyone do anything with this data? Like, do we ever dig into it and work out, what effect tax policy has on behaviour? And at that stage, it was very minor, the kinds of analyses that were happening. Now, that's improved a lot, right? We've got much better data. We've got much more research happening. But still, there's so many areas of government policy that we implement policy. We say it's going to do X. And then once we implement it, we move on. And we never go back and ask, did it actually do what we said it would do? And so, this government says that they're totally focused on accountability, on growing productivity. And to my mind, the best way to make sure the government is accountable for its performance in improving productivity is to build a kind of standard practice into the way government functions. So as a matter of course, have a look and see, did the policies we implemented actually do what we said they would do? And to me, that's a great way to ensure better policy, to ensure that, all of the policies we introduce are optimised, are working effectively, and can be updated based on, new evidence.
Stephen Hamilton, Assistant Professor of Economics at George Washington University. Thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Kieran.